Part 2. Scientology Processing. Chapter 11. Scientology Processing. Scientology is applied in many ways to many fields. One particular and specialized method of application of Scientology is its use on individuals and groups of people in addressing physical symptoms deriving from mental or spiritual factors and the improvement of their abilities and intelligence. By processing is meant the verbal exercising of a pre-clear in exact Scientology processes. By pre-clear is meant a person who is receiving processing. There is a great deal of terminology and precision in these processes and their use, and they are not combinable with older mental activities such as psychiatry, psychology, psychoanalysis, yoga, massage, etc. However, these processes are capable of addressing the same ills of the mind as are delineated by older methodology, with the addition that Scientology is alone in its ability to successfully overcome those psychosomatic ills to which it is addressed. It is the only study known which is capable of producing marked and significant increases in intelligence and general ability. Scientology processing, amongst other things, can improve the intelligence quotient of an individual, his ability or desire to communicate, his social attitudes, his capability in domestic harmony, his artistic creativity, his reaction time, and his well-being. An additional sphere of activity allied to processing is preventive Scientology. In this branch of processing, an individual is inhibited or restrained from assuming states lower than he has already suffered from. In other words, the progress of tendencies, anxieties, habits, and deteriorating activities can be halted or their occurrence can be prevented by Scientology. This is done by processing the individual on standard Scientology processes without particular attention to the disability involved. A Scientology practitioner is called an auditor, one who listens, a listener. Scientology processing is called auditing, by which the auditor listens, computes, and commands. The auditor and the pre-clear are together out of doors or in a quiet place where they will not be disturbed, or where they are not being subjected to interrupting influences. The role of the auditor is to give the pre-clear certain and exact commands which the pre-clear can follow and perform. The purpose of the auditor is to increase the ability of the pre-clear. The auditor's code is the governing set of rules for the general activity of auditing. The code follows. The Auditor's Code. 1. Do not evaluate for the pre-clear. 2. Do not invalidate or correct the pre-clear's data. 3. Use the processes which improve the pre-clear's case. 4. Keep all appointments once made. 5. Do not process a pre-clear after 10 p.m. 6. Do not process a pre-clear who is improperly fed. 7. Do not permit a frequent change of auditors. 8. Do not sympathize with the pre-clear. 9. Never permit the pre-clear to end the session on his own independent decision. 10. Never walk off from a pre-clear during a session. 11. Never get angry with a pre-clear. 12. Always reduce every communication lag encountered by continued use of the same question or process. 13. Always continue a process as long as it produces change, and no longer. 14. Be willing to grant beingness to the pre-clear. 15. Never mix the processes of Scientology with those of various other practices. 16. Always remain in good two-way communication with the pre-clear during sessions. The Auditor's Code governs the activity of the auditor during sessions, the time devoted to auditing. The activity of the Scientologist in general is governed by another broader code. The Code of a Scientologist. As a Scientologist, I pledge myself to the Code of Scientology for the good of all. 1. To hear or speak no word of disparagement to the press, public, or pre-clears concerning any of my fellow Scientologists, our professional organization, or those whose names are closely connected to this science. 2. To use the best I know of Scientology to the best of my ability to better my pre-clears, groups, and the world. 3. To refuse to accept for processing and to refuse to accept money from any pre-clear or group I feel I cannot honestly help. 4. To deter to the fullest extent of my power anyone misusing or degrading Scientology to harmful ends. 5. To prevent the use of Scientology in advertisements of other products. 6. To discourage the abuse of Scientology in the press. 7. To employ Scientology to the greatest good of the greatest number of dynamics. 8. To render good processing, sound training, and good discipline to those students or peoples entrusted to my care. 9. To refuse to impart the personal secrets of my pre-clears. 10. To engage in no unseemly disputes with the uninformed on the subject of my profession. As it can be seen, both of these codes are designed to protect the pre-clear as well as Scientology and the auditor in general. As these codes evolve from many years of observation and experience by a great number of people, it can be said that they are intensely important and are probably complete. Failure to observe them has resulted in a failure of Scientology. Scientology can do what it can do only when it is used within the limits of these two codes. Thus, it can be seen that the interjection of peculiarities or practices by the auditor into Scientology processing can actually nullify and eradicate the benefits of that processing. Any hope or promise in Scientology is conditional upon its good use by the individual and its use in particular within the limits of these two codes. Chapter 12. Beingness, Doingness, and Havingness. The game of life demands that one assumes a beingness in order to accomplish a doingness in the direction of havingness. Chapter 3, The Conditions of Existence. If you ask an auditor how these work in processing, he will tell you that there is a specialized form of each of these conditions. Beingness equals identity. The processing form of beingness is identity. To achieve a betterment of beingness and the granting of beingness, the auditor remedies with processing the scarcity of identities of the pre-clear. The pre-clear is often found in valences, other identities, his father's or mother's or marital partners, or any or all of thousands of possible people. He is unable to achieve or obtain, he thinks, enough identity or an identity of his own. He decries or criticizes the identities of others, fails to grant beingness to them. He himself cannot obtain enough identity to feel he has an identity. Identity is so scarce that it's too valuable. Nobody must have one. To be with such a person is therefore an uncomfortable experience, since he does not credit our identity, does not grant us beingness. The cure for this is elementary. Let us say he is obviously in father's valence, identity. He got into father's valence when he found he could get no attention from mother. Observing that father got some of her attention, he took father's identity. However, let us say he didn't like father. The auditor finds him hating himself. Himself is really father. A clever auditor would see that while he was in father's valence, it was really mother's attention that was sought. See later identities, valences. The auditor does not inform his pre-clear of such a finding. He asks the pre-clear to lie about, lowest form of creativity, identities which would attract mother's attention. Then, when the pre-clear can do this, the auditor would have him invent identities which would attract mother's attention. Suddenly, the pre-clear would be no longer in father's valence. However, he would have been not only in father's, but also in mother's valence. So the same process would have to be done on father. Lie about, the auditor would say, identities which would attract father's attention. Then invent one until the pre-clear had many and would no longer be in mother's valence. Solving father and mother valences is fundamental, since most people are somewhat in them or revolted from them. But people can be stuck in all sorts of identities, even bedposts when humans are too valuable to be used. The rule is that the more a person is stuck in a valence or identity, the fewer he conceives to exist, and the harder he thinks it is to get attention. Thus, he can become exhibitionistic, displaying himself too thoroughly, being too much there at all times. Or he can become dispersed, hiding himself, being vague, not there most of the time. People err in identity, in being too apparent or too little apparent. The remedy of either is the remedy of their scarcity of identity. Identity and attention. One needs an identity to play the game, as covered later, game and no-game conditions, but mainly to get attention. A being looks at things. To balance the flow of his attention, he feels he must also be looked at. Thus, he becomes attention-hungry. For instance, unlike races of Asia and Africa, the white does not usually believe he can get attention from matter or objects. The other cultures believe for the most part, and it is all a matter of consideration, that rocks, trees, walls, etc. can give them attention. The white race seldom believes this, and so is likely to become anxious about people. Thus, the white saves people, prevents famine, flood, disease, and revolution. For people, as the only purveyors of attention, are scarce. The white goes further. He often believes he can get attention only from whites, and that attention from other races is worthless. Thus, the other cultures are not very progressive, but, by and large, saner. And the white race is progressive but more frantic. The other cultures do not understand white concern for bad conditions, since what are a few million dead men? There are plenty of identities, and there is plenty of attention, they think. The white can't understand them, nor can they understand the white. Attention and identity form a group of two. Attention makes space. Identity closes space. Attention is a method of knowing. Inattention is a method of not knowing. Identity is a method of making known. Lack of identity is a method of making unknown. Valences. The whole study of valences is a fascinating one. A valence is defined as a false identity assumed unwittingly. An identity is modified by valences. People who can be nobody may try to be everybody. People who are seeking a way out of scarcity of identity may become fixed in false valences. Nations can become fixed in valences of countries they have conquered in war, etc., etc. A rule is that a person assumes the identity of that which gets attention. Another rule is that the person assumes the identity of that which makes him fail, for he gave it his attention, didn't he? There is a basic personality, a person's own identity. He colors or drowns this with valences as he loses or wins in life. He can be dug up. Identities, valences. There are 4 identities, or valences. Own valence. When one is in his own valence, he is said to be himself. As he departs from his own identity, he comes into the following. Exchanged valence. One has directly superimposed the identity of another on his own. Example, daughter becomes own mother to some degree. Remedy, one directly runs out mother. Attention valence. One has become the valence B because one wants attention from C. Example, one becomes mother because mother received attention from father while self did not. Remedy, run out father, even though preclear appears in valence of mother. Synthetic valence. One takes a valence about which he has been told. Example, mother tells child false things about father, accuses child of being like father, with result that child is forced into father's valence. Remedy, run out mother, even though preclear does not seem to be near mother's valence. Do equals effect. Doing can be defined as the action of creating an effect. An effect in creation is action. An auditor processing a pre-clear would always use effect processes to increase doingness. What effect could you create on Father? Would be a typical auditor question. If a pre-clear is fixated by books, a machine, a tool, a person, the auditor asks him to lie about, then invent effects he could create upon it. At first, the pre-clear may be able to think of none. Then, as the process is continued, he may become wildly imaginative or even cruel. Further running will bring the pre-clear into a more comfortable frame of mind. Criminals or maniacs are people who are frantically attempting to create an effect long after they know they cannot. They cannot then create decent effects, only violent effects. Neither can they work, do. Despair of creating an effect brings about aberration and irrational conduct. It also brings about laziness and carelessness. Command of attention is necessary to creating an effect. Therefore, when one conceives he cannot easily get attention, he seeks to create stronger effects. He creates effects to get attention. He gets attention to create effects. As in Axiom 10, the creation of an effect is the highest purpose in this universe. Thus, when one cannot create effects, he has no purpose, and thus it works out in life. It may be all right to be a stern and unrelenting superior or parent, but such create laziness and criminals. If one cannot have an effect created upon one, and one is known to another, very definitely harmful results will ensue. As one believes he creates the least effect upon unconscious or dead people, these, as in hospitals or China, become the subject of much aberrated activity. What effect could you create on an unconscious person or a dead person? Asked over and over by an auditor obtains some astonishing results. An artist stops his work when he believes he can no longer create an effect. A person actually dies for lack of effect. But security often depends on being able to create no effect. The whole subject of survival is bound up in no effect. Obviously, those things on which no effect can be made survive. If one is anxious about survival, a foolish thing, for he can't do anything else, he becomes anxious to have about him things which resist all effects. But as his only anxiety is about the survival of a valence or identity, remedy of the scarcity of these can resolve the matter. Another cycle of action, containing also the classes of effects, is start, change, and stop. This is the definition of control. Havingness. As there must be a playing field for a game to be held, see later game and no game conditions, so there must be havingness. One must be able to possess. There are millions of methods of possession in life. The obvious one becomes overlooked. If one can see a thing, he can have it, if he thinks he can. The degree to which one can live is the degree to which one can own. To own is not to label or cart away. To own is to be able to see, or touch, or occupy. One loses to the degree he is forbidden to have. But to play a game, one must be able to believe he can't have. Effect and have. Effect and have form a pair like attention and identity. An effect should be on or against something, thus havingness. If one's attention never meets anything, he doesn't always like it. Thus he wants objects. Effect makes distance. Have shortens distance. Problems. Man, or any life form in this universe, seems to love problems. A problem is more important than freedom. Problems keep up interest. When a man has a problem very thoroughly and can't solve it, he really has too few problems. He needs more. The insanity amongst the idle is a matter of problem scarcity. A problem is defined as two or more purposes in opposition, or intention versus intention. Out of the conditions of existence can come many complex problems. If a man had all the attention in the world, he would be unhappy. If he had all the identities possible, he would still be unhappy. If he could blow up Earth or create any other huge effect he wanted without limit, He would be miserable or insane. If he could own everything everywhere, he would be dulled to apathy. Or so it seems. For these conditions of existence are all subordinate to the need of problems by current Scientology reasoning and results. Thus, to have a person lie about problems or invent problems of the same size as the ones he has or the valence he is in, or to invent data of the same or a different size as the one he is fixed upon, is to make a well man. Probably the problem is the antidote to unconsciousness. It is certainly the antidote for boredom. But in making up the problems of life, he consults the conditions of existence, be, do, have, and their necessary partner in every case, attention. Chapter 13. Self-determinism and pan-determinism. Self-determinism. Self-determinism is a condition of determining the actions of self. It is a first, self-dynamic action and leaves the remaining 7 undetermined or, in actuality, in opposition to the self. Thus, if one wants to take on the rest of life in a free-for-all fight, one could be entirely insistent upon total self-determinism. As the remainder of the dynamics must have a say in one's self to function, they fight at once any attempt at total self-determinism. Pan-determinism. Pan-determinism means determining the action of self and others. It means wider determinism than self. In an aberrated fashion, we see this in an effort to control all others to aggrandize, make important, self. Pan-determinism is a cross-determinism, or determinism of 2 sides. If one controls, monitors, both sides of a chess game, one is above the game. One is self-determined, then, in any situation in which he is fighting. He is pan-determined in any situation which he is controlling. To become pan-determined, rather than only self-determined, it is necessary to view both sides. A problem is an intention versus intention. It is then something that has 2 opposing sides. By creating problems, one tends to view both sides in opposition, and so becomes pan-determined. Thus, a problem only appears to be necessary to man. The problem is the closest reality man has to pan-determinism. In processing, the invention of problems then shows a wider view and so exteriorizes one from difficulty. Chapter 14. Game and no-game conditions. In Scientology, the most important single elements to the auditor are game conditions and no-game conditions. Reason. Reason. All games are aberrative. All processing is directed toward establishing game conditions. Little or no processing is directed toward no game conditions. Therefore, it is of the utmost importance to know exactly what these are, for one could be superficial about it and lose. Rule. Rule. All games are aberrative. Some are fun. Elements of games. The elements of games to the auditor are: a game consists of freedoms, barriers, and purposes. In a game, one's own team or self must receive no effect and must deliver an effect upon the other team or opponent. A game should have space and, preferably, a playing field. A game is played in the same time continuum for both sides, all players. A game must have something which one does not have in order for it to be won. Some part of the dynamics must be excluded for a game condition to exist. The amount of the dynamics excluded represents the tone of the game. Games occur only when there is intention opposing intention, purpose opposing purpose. A scarcity of games forces the pre-clear to accept less desirable games. Participation in any game, whether it be the game of sick man, jealous wife, or polo, is preferable to being in a no-game condition. The type of game entered by a person is determined by his consideration as to how much and what kind of an effect he may receive while trying to deliver an effect. Games are the basic mechanism for continuing attention. To play a game, one must be able to not know his past and future and not know his opponent's complete intentions. Game conditions. Game conditions are attention, identity, effect on opponents, no effect on self. Can't have on opponents and goals and their areas. Have on self, tools of play, own goals and field. Purpose, problems of play, self-determinism, opponents, the possibility of loss, the possibility of winning, communication, non-arrival, control. No game conditions. No game conditions are knowing all, not knowing everything, serenity, namelessness, no effect on opponent, effect on self or team, others have everything, self can't have, solutions, pandeterminism, friendship with all, understanding, total communication, no communication of any kind whatsoever, win, lose, no universe, no playing field, arrival, death. Process only with those conditions listed as game conditions. Do not process directly toward those conditions listed as no game conditions. So doing, the auditor will run out, erase, the aberrative effect of games and restore an ability to play a game. Chapter 15. Auditing. Procedures and processes. The conditions of auditing. Certain definite conditions must prevail, and a certain methodology must be followed in order that processing may be beneficial to its fullest extent. Probably the first condition is a good grasp of Scientology and its mission in the world. The second condition would be a relaxed state of mind on the part of the auditor and the confidence that his use of Scientology upon the pre-clear will not produce a harmful result. The third requisite should be finding a pre-clear. By this, it is literally meant that one should discover somebody willing to be processed, and having discovered one so willing, should then make sure that he is aware that he is there being processed. The fourth requisite would be a quiet place in which to audit, with every precaution taken that the pre-clear will not be interrupted or burst in upon or unduly startled during processing. Auditing procedures. All requisites for auditing from here on are entirely concerned with procedures and processes. By auditing procedure is meant the general model of how one goes about addressing a pre-clear. This includes an ability to place one question, worded exactly the same way over and over again, to the pre-clear, no matter how many times the pre-clear has answered the question. It should include the ability to acknowledge with a good and all right every time a pre-clear executes or completes the execution of a command. It should include the ability to accept a communication from the pre-clear. When the pre-clear has something to say, the auditor should pay some attention to the communication and should acknowledge the fact that he has received the pre-clear's communication. Procedure also includes the ability to sense when the pre-clear is being overstrained by processing or is being unduly annoyed, and to handle such crises in the session to prevent the pre-clear from leaving. An auditor should have the ability of handling startling remarks or occurrences by the pre-clear. An auditor should also have the knack of preventing the pre-clear from talking obsessively, since prolonged conversation markedly reduces the havingness of the pre-clear. The sooner long dissertations by the pre-clear are cut off, the better for the session, the period of time devoted to auditing, in general. Processes, as distinct from procedures, consist of utilizing the principle of the gradient scale to the end of placing the pre-clear in better control of himself, his mind, the people, and the universe around him. By gradient scale is meant a proceeding from simplicity toward greater difficulty, giving the pre-clear always no more than he can do, but giving him as much as he can do until he can handle a great deal. The idea here is to give the pre-clear nothing but wins and to refrain from giving the pre-clear losses in the game of processing. Thus, it can be seen that processing is a team activity and is not itself a game, whereby the auditor opposes and seeks to defeat the pre-clear, and the pre-clear seeks to defeat the auditor. For when this condition exists, little results in processing. Exact processes. The earliest stage of auditing consists in taking over control of the pre-clear, so as to restore to the pre-clear more control of himself than he has had. The most fundamental step is, then, location, whereby the pre-clear is made to be aware of the fact that he is in an auditing room, that an auditor is present, and that the pre-clear is being a pre-clear. Those conditions will become quite apparent if one realizes that it would be very difficult for a son to process a father. A father is not likely to recognize, in his auditor, anything else than the boy he raised. Therefore, the father would have to be made aware of the fact that the son was a competent practitioner before the father could be placed under control in processing. Look at me. Who am I? One of the most elementary commands in Scientology is, look at me. Who am I? After a pre-clear has been asked to do this many times, until he can do so quickly and accurately and without protest, it can be said that the pre-clear will have found the auditor. Start, change, and stop. The pre-clear is asked by the auditor to control, which is to say, start, change, and stop, the anatomy of control, anything he is capable of controlling. In a very bad case, this might be a very small object being pushed around on a table, being started and changed and stopped each time, specifically and only at the auditor's command, until the pre-clear realizes that he himself can start, change, and stop the object. When I say start, you start the object in that direction. Auditor indicates direction. Okay? Start. When the pre-clear has, did you start the object? When I say change, you change the object's position from location designated by auditor to location designated by auditor. Okay? Change. When the pre-clear has, did you change the object? I'm going to tell you to get the object moving in that direction. Auditor indicates direction. When I say stop, you stop the object. Okay? Get the object moving. Stop. When the pre-clear has, did you stop the object? In all of his commands, the auditor must be careful never to give a second command before the first one has been fully obeyed. Sometimes 4 or 5 hours spent in this exercise are very well spent on a very difficult pre-clear. The pre-clear is then asked to start, change, and stop his own body under the auditor's specific and precise direction. The auditor substitutes body in place of object in the above commands. A pre-clear in this procedure is walked around the room and is made to start, change the direction of, and stop his body, one of these at a time in emphasis, until he realizes that he can do so with ease. Only now could it be said that a session is well in progress or that a pre-clear is securely under the auditor's command. It should be noted especially that the goal of Scientology is better self-determinism for the pre-clear. This rules out at once hypnotism, drugs, alcohol, or other control mechanisms used by other and older therapies. It will be found that such things are not only not necessary, but they are in direct opposition to the goals of greater ability for the pre-clear. The principal points of concentration for the auditor now become 1. The ability of the pre-clear to have. 2. The ability of the pre-clear to not know. 3. And the ability of the pre-clear to play a game. An additional factor is the ability of the pre-clear to be himself and not a number of other people, such as his father, his mother, his marital partner, or his children. See earlier, beingness, doingness, and havingness. Have. Trio. The ability of the pre-clear is increased by addressing havingness with the process known as the trio. These are 3 questions, or rather, commands. 1. Look around here and tell me what you could have. 2. Look around here and tell me what you would permit to remain in place. 3. Look around and tell me with what you could dispense. Number 1 above is used usually about 10 times. Then number 2 is used 5 times, and number 3 is used once. This ratio of 10, 5, and 1 would be an ordinary or routine approach to havingness. The end in view is to bring the preclear into a condition whereby he can possess or own or have whatever he sees without further conditions, ramifications, or restrictions. This is the most therapeutic of all processes, elementary as it might seem. It is done without too much two-way communication or discussion with the preclear, and it is done until the preclear can answer questions 1, 2, and 3 equally well. It should be noted at once that 25 hours of use of this process by an auditor upon a preclear, over a period of several sessions, usually brings about a very high rise in tone. By saying 25 hours, it is intended to give the idea of the length of time the process should be used. As it is a strain on the usual person to repeat the same question over and over, it will be seen that an auditor should be well disciplined or very well trained before he audits. In the case of a preclear who is very unable, can't have is substituted for have in the first question above for a few hours, until the preclear is ready for the trio in its have form. Selecting categories, which are the 8 dynamics, and selecting them as they seem to be put forward by the preclear, one asks what these categories can't have. One does not stress what the individual himself can't have, for to do so would make the individual postulate against himself. Let us suppose that the preclear is a man and that the category women had been chosen. The auditing question would then be, look around here and tell me what women can't have. On the male preclear, of course, look around here and tell me what men can't have would also be runnable, since the truth of the matter is the preclear is not a male but has a male body. On other categories, the question is the same. Look around here and tell me what category can't have. This can't is the plus and minus aspect of all thought, and in Scientology is called by a specialized word, dichotomy. Not know. The rehabilitation of the ability of the preclear to not know is also rehabilitation of the preclear in the time stream, since the process of time consists of knowing the present moment and not knowing the past and not knowing the future simultaneously. This process, like all other Scientology processes, is repetitive. The process is run, ordinarily, only after the preclear is in very good condition and is generally run in an exterior, well-inhabited place. Here, the auditor, without exciting public comment, indicates a person and asks the preclear, "Can you not know something about that person?" The auditor does not permit the preclear to not know things which the preclear already doesn't know. The preclear not knows only those things which are visible and apparent about the person. This is also run on other objects in the environment, such as walls, floors, chairs, and other things. The auditor should not be startled when, for the preclear, large chunks of the environment start to disappear. This is ordinary routine, and, in effect, the preclear should make the entirety of the environment disappear at his own command. The environment does not disappear for the auditor. The end goal of this not-know process is the disappearance of the entire universe under the preclear's control, but only for the preclear. It will be discovered while running this that the preclear's havingness may deteriorate. If this happens, he was not run enough on the trio before he was run on this process. It is only necessary in such a case to intersperse, "Look around here and tell me what you could have," with the not know command to keep the preclear in good condition. Drop of havingness is manifested by nervous agitation, obsessive talk, or semi-unconsciousness or dopiness on the part of the preclear. These manifestations only indicate reduction of havingness. The reverse of the question here is, tell me something that you would be willing to have that person, indicated by the auditor, not know about you. Both sides of the question have to be run, audited. This process can be continued for 25 hours, or even 50 or 75 hours of auditing with considerable benefit, so long as it does not react too violently upon the preclear in terms of loss of havingness. It should be noted, in running either the trio or not know on a pre-clear, that the pre-clear may exteriorize. In other words, it may become apparent, either by his observation or that the pre-clear informs him, that the auditor has exteriorized a pre-clear. In Chapter 7, The Parts of Man, there is an explanation of this phenomenon. In modern auditing, the auditor does not do anything odd about this beyond receive and be interested in the pre-clear statement of the fact. The pre-clear should not be permitted to become alarmed, since it is a usual manifestation. A pre-clear is in better condition and will audit better exteriorized than in his head. An actual ability to not know is an ability to erase the past by self-command, without suppressing it with energy or going into any other method, and is necessary to help the pre-clear. It is the primary rehabilitation in terms of knowingness. Forgetting is a lower manifestation than not knowingness. Play a game. The third ability to be addressed by the auditor is the ability of the pre-clear to play a game. First and foremost in the requisites to play a game is the ability to control. One must be able to control something in order to participate in a game. Therefore, the general rehabilitation of control, by starting, changing, and stopping things, is a rehabilitation in the ability to play a game. When a pre-clear refuses to recover, it is because the pre-clear is using his state as a game and does not believe that there is any better game for him to play than the state he is in. He may protest if this is called a game. Nevertheless, any condition will surrender if the auditor has the pre-clear invent similar conditions or even tell lies about the existing condition. Inventing games, or inventing conditions, or inventing problems, alike rehabilitate the ability to play a game. Chief amongst these various rehabilitation factors are control, start, change, and stop, problems, and the willingness to overwhelm or be overwhelmed. One ceases to be able to have games when one loses control over various things, when one becomes short of problems, and when one is unwilling to be overwhelmed, in other words, to lose, or to overwhelm, to win. It will be found while running havingness, as in the trio above, that one may run down the ability to play a game, since havingness is in part the reward of a game. In the matter of problems, it will be seen that these are completely necessary to the playing of a game. The anatomy of a problem is intention versus intention. This is, in essence, the purpose of all games, to have two sides, each one with an opposed intention. Technically, a problem is two or more purposes in conflict. It is very simple to detect whether or not the pre-clear is suffering from a scarcity of games. The pre-clear who needs more games clutches to himself various present-time problems. If an auditor is confronted with a pre-clear who is being obsessed by a problem in present time, he knows two things. One, that the pre-clear's ability to play a game is low. Two, that he must run an exact process at once to rehabilitate the pre-clear in session. It often happens at the beginning of an auditing session that the pre-clear has encountered a heavy present-time problem between sessions. The pre-clear must always be consulted before the session is actually in progress, as to whether or not he has anything worrying him. To a pre-clear who is worried about some present-time situation or problem, no other process has any greater effectiveness than the following one. Problems of comparable magnitude. The auditor, with a very brief discussion of the problem, asks the pre-clear to invent a problem of comparable magnitude. He may have to reword this request to make the pre-clear understand it completely, but the auditor wants, in essence, the pre-clear to invent or create a problem he considers similar to the problem he has. If the pre-clear is unable to do this, it is necessary then to have him lie about the problem which he has. Lying is the lowest order of creativeness. After he has lied about the problem for a short time, it will be found that he will be able to invent problems. He should be made to invent problem after problem until he is no longer concerned with his present time problem. The auditor should understand that a pre-clear who is now willing to do something about the problem has not been run long enough on the invent a problem of comparable magnitude. As long as the pre-clear is attempting to do something about the problem is still of obsessive importance to him. No session can be continued successfully until such a present-time problem is entirely flat. And it has been the experience that when a present-time problem was not completely eradicated by this process, the remainder of the session, or indeed the entire course of auditing, may be interrupted. When a pre-clear does not seem to be advancing under auditing, a thing which he does markedly and observedly, it must then be supposed that the pre-clear has a present-time problem which has not been eradicated and which must be handled in auditing. Although the auditor gives the pre-clear to understand that he, too, believes this present-time problem is extremely important, the auditor should not believe that this process will not handle any present-time problem, since it will. This process should be done on some pre-clears in company with the trio. If the pre-clear is asked to lie about or invent a problem of comparable magnitude, and while doing so becomes agitated or unconscious, or begins to talk wildly or obsessively, it must be assumed that he will have to have some havingness run on him, until the agitation or manifestation ceases, so that the problems of comparable magnitude process can be resumed. Overwhelming. Another aspect of the ability to play a game is the willingness to win and the willingness to lose. An individual has to be willing to be cause or willing to be an effect. As far as games are concerned, this is reduced to a willingness to win and a willingness to lose. People become afraid of defeat and afraid of failure. The entire anatomy of failure is only that one's postulates or intentions are reversed in action. For instance, one intends to strike a wall and strikes it. That is a win. One intends not to strike a wall and doesn't strike it. That is again a win. One intends not to strike a wall and strikes it. That is a lose. One intends to strike a wall and can't strike it. This is again a lose. It will be seen in this, as well as other things, that the most significant therapy there is changing the mind. All things are as one considers they are, and in no other way. If it is sufficiently simple to give the definition of winning and losing, so it is simple to process the matter. This condition is best expressed in processing by a process known as overwhelming. An elementary way of running this is to take the pre-clear outside where there are numbers of people to observe and, indicating a person, ask the pre-clear, "What could overwhelm that person?" When the pre-clear answers this, he is asked about the same person, "What could that person overwhelm?" He is then asked, as the third question, "Look around here and tell me what you could have." These three questions are run one after the other. Then another person is chosen, and then the three questions are asked again. This process can be varied in its wording, but the central idea must remain as above. The pre-clear can be asked, "What would you permit to overwhelm that person?" And "What would you permit that person to overwhelm?" And, of course, "Look around here and tell me what you could have." This is only one of a number of possible processes on the subject of overwhelming. But it should be noted that asking the pre-clear to think of things which would overwhelm him could be fatal to the case. Where overwhelming is handled, the pre-clear should be given a detached view. Separateness. As a counterposition to havingness processes, trio, but one which is less therapeutic, is separateness. One asks the pre-clear to look around and discover things which are separate from you. This is repeated over and over. It is, however, destructive of havingness, even though it will occasionally prove beneficial. Use of processes. It will be seen that havingness, barriers, not knowingness, being in present time and not in the past or the future, purposes, problems, antagonists or intention versus intention, and separateness, freedom, well cover the anatomy of games. It is not to be thought, however, that havingness addresses itself only to games. Many other factors enter into it. In amongst all of these, it is of the greatest single importance. In these days of Scientology, one addresses the subjective self, the mind, as little as possible. One keeps the pre-clear alert to the broad environment around him. An address to the various energy patterns of the mind is less beneficial than exercises which directly approach other people or the physical universe. Therefore, asking a pre-clear to sit still and answer the question, "What could you have?" when it is answered by the pre-clear from his experience or on the score of things which are not present, is found to be non-therapeutic and is found instead to decrease the ability and intelligence of the pre-clear. This is what is known as a subjective, inside the mind only, process. These are the principal processes which produce marked gains. There are other processes, and there are combinations of processes, but these given here are the most important. A Scientologist, knowing the mind completely, can of course do many tricks with the conditions of people to improve them. One of these is the ability to address a psychosomatic illness, such as a crippled leg, which, having nothing physically wrong with it, is yet not usable. The auditor could ask the pre-clear, "Tell me a lie about your leg," with a possible relief of the pain or symptoms. Asking the pre-clear repeatedly, "Look around here and tell me something your leg could have," would undoubtedly release the somatic. Asking the pre-clear with the bad leg, "What problem could your leg be to you?" or requiring him to invent a problem of comparable magnitude to your leg, would produce a distinct change in the condition of the leg. This would apply to any other body part or organ. It would also apply, strangely enough, to the pre-clear's possessions. If a pre-clear had a vehicle or cart which was out of repair or troublesome to him, one could ask him, "What problem could a cart be to you?" Requesting him to invent many such problems, one would discover that he had solved his problems with the cart. There is the phenomenon in existence that the pre-clear already has many set games. When one asks him to give the auditor problems, he already has the manifestations of as-ising or erasing taking place. Thought erases. Therefore, the number of problems or games the pre-clear could have would be reduced by asking him to recount those which he already has. Asking the pre-clear to recount or describe his symptoms is far less than therapeutic and may result in a worsening of those symptoms, contrary to what some schools of thought have believed in the past, but which accounts for their failures. Auditing. Things to avoid. There are specific things which one must avoid in auditing. These follow. 1. Significances. The easiest thing a Thetan does is change his mind. The most difficult thing he does is handle the environment in which he finds himself situated. Therefore, asking a Thetan to run out various ideas is a fallacy. It is a mistake. Asking the pre-clear to think over something can also be an error. Asking a pre-clear to do exercises which concern his mind alone can be entirely fatal. A pre-clear is processed between himself and his environment. If he is processed between himself and his mind, he is processed up too short a view, and his condition will worsen. 2. Two-way communication. There can be far too much two-way communication or far too much communication in an auditing session. Communication involves the reduction of havingness. Letting a pre-clear talk on and on, or obsessively, is to let a pre-clear reduce his havingness. The pre-clear who is permitted to go on talking will talk himself down tone scale and into a bad condition. It is better for the auditor simply and discourteously to tell a pre-clear to shut up than to have the pre-clear run himself out of the bottom on havingness. You can observe this for yourself if you permit a person who is not too able to talk about his troubles to keep on talking. He will begin to talk more and more hectically. He is reducing his havingness. He will eventually talk himself down the tone scale into apathy, at which time he will be willing to tell you, as you insist upon it, that he feels better, when as a matter of fact, he is actually worse. Asking a pre-clear, "How do you feel now?" can reduce his havingness, since he looks over his present time condition and as-is some mass. 3. Too many processes. It is possible to run a pre-clear on too many processes in too short a time with a reduction of the pre-clear's recovery. This is handled by observing the communication lag of the pre-clear. It will be discovered that the pre-clear will space his answers to a repeated question differently with each answer. When a long period ensues between his answer to the question a second time, he is said to have a communication lag. The communication lag is the length of time between the placing of the question by the auditor and the answering of that exact question by the pre-clear. It is not the length of time between the placing of the question by the auditor and some statement by the pre-clear. It will be found that the communication lag lengthens and shortens on a repeated question. The question, on the 10th time it has been asked, may detect no significant lag. This is the time to stop asking that question, since it now has no appreciable communication lag. One can leave any process when the communication lag for 3 successive questions is the same. In order to get from one process to another, one employs a communication bridge, which to a marked degree reduces the liability of too many processes. A communication bridge is always used. Before a question is asked, the pre-clear should have the question discussed with him and the wording of the question agreed upon as though he were making a contract with the auditor. The auditor says that he is going to have the pre-clear do certain things and finds out if it's all right with the pre-clear if the auditor asks him to do these things. This is the first part of a communication bridge. It precedes all questions, but when one is changing from one process to another, the bridge becomes a bridge indeed. One levels out the old process by asking the pre-clear whether or not he doesn't think it is safe to leave that process now. One discusses the possible benefit of the process and then tells the pre-clear that he is no longer going to use that process. Now he tells the pre-clear he is going to use a new process, describes the process, and gets an agreement on it. When the agreement is achieved, then he uses this process. The communication bridge is used at all times. The last half of it, the agreement on a new process, is always used before any process is begun. 4. Failure to handle the present time problem. Probably more cases are stalled or found unable to benefit in processing because of the neglect of the present time problem, as covered above, than any other single item. 5. Unconsciousness, dopiness, or agitation on the part of the pre-clear is not a mark of good condition. It is a loss of havingness. The pre-clear must never be processed into unconsciousness or dopiness. He should always be kept alert. The basic phenomenon of unconsciousness is a flow which has flowed too long in one direction. If one talks too long at somebody, he will render him unconscious. In order to wake up the target of all that talk, it is necessary to get the unconscious person to do some talking. It is simply necessary to reverse any flow to make unconsciousness disappear. But this is normally cared for in modern Scientology by running the trio above. Epilogue: The future of Scientology. With man now equipped with weapons sufficient to destroy all mankind on earth, the emergence of a new religion capable of handling man is vital. Scientology is such a religion. It was born in the same crucible as the atomic bomb. The basic intelligence of Scientology came from nuclear physics, higher mathematics, and the understanding of the ancients in the East. Scientology can do exactly what it says it can do. With Scientology, man can prevent insanity, criminality, and war. It is for man to use. It is for the betterment of man. Today, the primary race of Earth is not between one nation and another. The only race that matters at this moment is the one being run between Scientology and the atomic bomb. The history of man, as has been said by well-known authorities, may well depend upon which one wins. Finis.